The United States and Canada have been caught in escalating trade tensions following President Donald Trump's re-election in November 2024, with tariffs imposed and countermeasures taken, leading to growing economic uncertainty and diplomatic strain. The situation began to unfold on November 25, 2024, when Trump announced via Truth Social his intention to impose a 25% tariff on all imports from Canada and Mexico, citing what he described as their failure to properly secure their borders with the U.S. In the same statement, Trump also pledged a 10% tariff on Chinese imports, calling on Beijing to take stronger measures to curb the production of illegal fentanyl bound for American shores. This announcement sparked immediate backlash from both Canada and Mexico, with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau denouncing the move as reckless and unwarranted, warning that it would have severe consequences for both countries' economies. Canada initially sought to de-escalate the situation, but tensions only grew. On January 20, 2025, Trump signed a memorandum directing his cabinet to assess what he called an emergency caused by unlawful migration and the flow of fentanyl from Canada, Mexico, and China. The memo instructed officials to propose trade and national security measures in response, a clear indication that tariffs were imminent. Shortly thereafter, on February 1, 2025, Trump issued an executive order imposing 25% tariffs on goods from both Mexico and Canada, along with a 10% tariff on Chinese imports. The White House announced that these tariffs would take effect on February 4, 2025. Trudeau responded swiftly, vowing that Canada would retaliate with equivalent tariffs on American goods. He pledged to target $30 billion CAD worth of U.S. exports, with plans to expand these countermeasures to $125 billion CAD over the following weeks. As fears of economic disruption mounted, Trump unexpectedly announced a one-month pause on the tariffs for Canada and Mexico on February 3rd, after reaching separate agreements with both nations. Canada agreed to strengthen its border security and appoint a fentanyl czar, while Mexico committed to deploying additional troops to its northern border. However, the U.S. pressed ahead with the 10% tariffs on Chinese imports, which took effect as planned on February 4th. Despite the temporary reprieve for North American trade, the end of the one-month delay brought renewed friction. On February 27th, Trump reaffirmed his intention to impose the 25% tariffs on Canadian and Mexican imports when the pause expired on March 4th. In addition, he announced plans for an extra 10% tariff on Chinese goods. Trudeau once again condemned the move, describing it as unacceptable and punitive, and vowed that Canada would respond in kind. By March 3rd, the growing prospect of a full-scale trade war sent shockwaves through financial markets. Speaking from the White House, Trump reiterated that the tariffs would take effect at midnight. Wall Street reacted sharply to the news, with the S&P 500 closing down 1.7%, marking its worst trading day since December. At 12:01 a.m. Eastern Time on March 4th, the tariffs officially went into effect, triggering a near-instant trade war. Canada and China both announced retaliatory tariffs, promising additional economic countermeasures. Trudeau condemned the U.S. move as short-sighted and destructive, confirming that Canada would impose reciprocal 25% tariffs on U.S. exports. Key American industries such as agriculture, consumer goods, and manufacturing were directly targeted by these countermeasures. Meanwhile, Mexico adopted a more cautious approach. President Claudia Sheinbaum criticized the U.S. tariffs but held off on immediate retaliation, opting instead for direct talks with Trump. The uncertainty surrounding the situation caused U.S. stocks to plunge even further, as investors feared prolonged economic instability. In a surprising turn of events on March 5th, Trump announced a one-month delay on auto tariffs after facing pressure from major U.S. automakers, including Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis, the parent company of Jeep and Chrysler. These companies warned that the tariffs could cause massive disruptions to supply chains. This temporary reprieve provided some relief to markets, triggering a rebound that saw all major indexes rise by the end of the trading day. However, the relief was short-lived. On March 6th, Trump signed an executive order that paused tariffs on goods compliant with the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, but financial markets remained volatile. The S&P 500 fell another 2%, while the Nasdaq dropped 2.5%, reflecting continued anxiety over the unpredictable nature of U.S. trade policy. As the trade dispute deepened, Ontario Premier Doug Ford declared that the province would enforce a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to the United States, starting Monday, March 10th. This measure would affect approximately 1.5 million American homes and businesses in states such as Michigan, New York, and Minnesota, which rely heavily on Ontario's power supply. Ford warned that Ontario was prepared to escalate its measures if necessary, even threatening to shut off electricity exports entirely if the situation demanded it. Ford also proposed additional retaliatory measures, including a surcharge on every megawatt of electricity sold to the U.S., the annulment of a $100 million contract with Elon Musk's Starlink internet company, and the removal of all U.S. alcohol from Liquor Control Board of Ontario, LCBO, outlets. In the face of these escalating tensions, Canadian Member of Parliament Charlie Angus called on Canadians to boycott U.S. products in response to Trump's tariffs. Angus also rejected Trump's repeated suggestions about annexing Canada as the 51st U.S. state, affirming Canada's sovereignty and independence. Analysts have warned that the economic impacts of Trump's tariffs could be considerable, with potential job losses and rising expenses in Canada. Ontario, as the country's industrial core, is particularly vulnerable. To prepare for potential fallout, the provincial government has earmarked over $40 billion in economic relief, including tax deferrals, payroll subsidies, and direct municipal aid. Some speculate that Trump's tariffs may serve broader strategic goals, such as pressuring Canada into aligning more closely with U.S. economic interests. Others suggest that the tariffs could be a negotiating tactic, creating leverage to force Canada into making concessions. Regardless of the motivations, the trade tensions have pushed Canada to seek diversification of its export markets, particularly toward Asia. The completion of the Trans Mountain Expansion (TMX) pipeline in early 2024 has facilitated increased Canadian crude oil shipments to China, Japan, and South Korea. As the situation continues to evolve, the future of U.S.-Canada trade relations remains uncertain. Businesses on both sides of the border are scrambling to adapt to rapidly changing policies, while political leaders weigh their next steps. Whether a long-term resolution can be reached or if the cycle of tariffs and retaliation will persist remains to be seen.